My name is Elizabeth Thompson. I am very honored to be serving as the producer of the Sustainability Lab's inaugural conversation series called Exploring the Sustainability Challenge. Welcome to you all. Just a little bit of background about why we're doing this. The series is being launched as a means for the Sustainability Lab to really proactively contribute to the urgent need to develop new models and approaches to addressing the interrelated sustainability crises affecting the world today. No doubt many of you are well aware of them and working at the front lines. As the international community races to recommit to more aggressive carbon reduction goals, we are reminded once again that there really is no overarching framework or model to understand these goals in relation to all the other key factors in achieving a sustainable future. Meeting the global sustainability challenge requires a fundamental shift in the way we look at the world, the way we engage with each other, and with all other forms of life, and how we manage human affairs. Our capacity for thinking in new paradigms and pursuing creative experimentation is absolutely essential. So it's our hope that this conversation series will provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, and we're very honored to have many leaders who are engaged in some of the most pressing issues facing the world today joining us throughout the course of this series, which is a once-a-month gathering through the end of this year. We'll be looking at the science of climate change, why biodiversity is so important, combating desertification, the economics of sustainability, sustainability in the developing world, urbanization and sustainability, and importantly, the role of art and the artistic imagination and how it factors into where we're headed with this challenge. So we look forward to your joining us for all of our subsequent gatherings. Tonight, we're going to be setting the context for the series. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Michael Ben-Eli, the founder of the Sustainability Laboratory, about the meaning of the very term sustainability. We're going to start right at the beginning and what the implications are regarding sustainability as a systems state. We'll learn about the lab's innovative approach to addressing sustainability-related issues and what the key factors are in creating transformational change. I want to introduce Michael. I first met Michael when I was serving as the executive director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. At that time, which I think at this point was about 15 years ago, Michael was developing what has become the heart of the lab's signature approach, what he calls the definition of sustainability and the 5 core principles of sustainability, which we're going to hear about a little bit this evening. Working together with Joshua Arno, who I think is joining us tonight, who is currently an advisor and key supporter of the lab's work, and at the time, the president of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. The Institute created an online forum for Michael to test the principles out with a wide range of experts and industry leaders and integrate their feedback. This was really sort of the initial seeds that were planted that have now evolved into the lab. And the principles developed by Michael have since been widely acclaimed and adopted as a breakthrough framework for understanding the dynamics of sustainability. Michael was a close associate of Buckminster Fuller, with whom he collaborated on research involving advanced structural systems and other issues. I think it's safe to say that Michael's experience working with Fuller really set the course for his life's work. You'll hear tonight that Michael is a true pioneer and a visionary. his work in applied systems thinking, cybernetics, and sustainability have been widely recognized around the world. And in 2016, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award and was inducted into the International Green Industry Hall of Fame, which is among many other awards and recognitions. You can read much more about Michael and his work by clicking on a bio link that is already in the chat or will be there momentarily. Thank you, Alyssa. So in a minute, we're going to get started with our conversation, but first we're going to watch a very short video to sort of orient you about the Sustainability Lab. And before we do that, I just want to acknowledge and thank all the invisible hearts and hands that have played a role in putting this series together and ensuring that we have so many of you joining us. This includes the lab's board of directors and advisors, and most importantly, Alyssa Murray, who is the lab's sort of wizard of everything, whose tireless dedication makes so much of what the lab does in the world possible. So now I'm going to turn it back to you, Benjamin, to play the short film, and then Michael and I will be back.
Our planet is in distress. Persistent, insensitive human activities now threaten every vital component of the biosphere, including the well-being of our own species. We are faced with a choice: continuous deterioration or a commitment to sustainability. Transitioning from the current state of affairs to a sustainable basis is an unprecedented challenge. There is no blueprint to guide us. We need bold experimentation with new ways of thinking and acting. This is why we established the Sustainability Laboratory, a global platform for sustainability innovations, a catalyst inspiring positive change. In our development projects, we work collaboratively with communities to bring about sustainability-related transformations. In our education initiatives, we help train future leaders to tackle the urgent sustainability issues facing the planet. And in our research projects, we foster groundbreaking innovations in technology. This is the Sustainability Laboratory, aiming to expand prospects and produce positive, life-affirming impacts on people and ecosystems in all parts of the world, joining with others to ensure a transition to a sustainable future.
So, welcome, Michael. We're so glad you're here.
It's really great to be here with you, Elizabeth, and all the other people that are joining us. Yeah. I just wanted to mention something small before we get off, that the video that we have seen, and there's another one I understand that will come at the end, both were produced by Yam Eisner, who is one of the alumni of the educational program, the Global Sustainability Fellow. And I think I saw him in one of those pictures. So hello, Jan, and thank you for that beautiful video.
All right, so I'm going to start sort of with a real basic question. You know, why did you start a lab? Can you just share a bit about the decisions that led up to your starting this initiative? Obviously, there are many organizations addressing sustainability in one way or another, but why did you feel the need to do this?
Well, let's see. First, like you saw in that film, the lab was established in order to demonstrate and develop and demonstrate groundbreaking approaches to sustainability practices. And actually, the idea behind the lab is very simple, and that is that the challenges of transitioning to a more sustainable way, the challenges for humanity, are entirely unprecedented. There's really no experience, no expert of running the planet with 9.5 or 10 billion people in a more or less abundant way, harmoniously and peacefully. So there's no cookbook to guide us. There's no recipe book. There's no off-the-shelf kind of prescription to tell us exactly what to do. And if those are lacking, you need to experiment. And where do you experiment? You experiment in a lab. And what does the planet need now? A global laboratory for sustainability innovations. Mm-hmm. And no one is doing it, so why not do it? So it was obviously a very naive, perhaps a little Don Quixotic kind of notion, but nevertheless, we launched the lab, 12 years ago in 2008, with the idea that, and the connotation of really sound science and creative experimentation and groundbreaking innovation. These are the kind of thing that we wanted to achieve. And as I said, we launched about 2008 as a not-for-profit research, development, and education organization. And I think that with relatively modest resources, we achieved quite a significant results and some impactful results in many places.
So are you looking to build a big institution, or, you know, my understanding of the lab is that you have a kind of network model in mind for the growth and evolution of this organization. Can you talk a little bit about that? And because that in and of itself seems a novel idea.
I abhor large institutions because they tend to become very bureaucratic very quickly and their own agenda. So behind the lab, there are two ideas, basically. One is to develop over time a portfolio of showcase demonstration projects that basically demonstrate the application of the sustainability laboratories and so forth. And the other, and these are kind of showcase model project that other can take up and scale up and do learn from or whatever. The other idea, which I think is interesting, is to develop the lab as a global network, loose network of activity centers that map onto particular ecozones. I think that the ecozone distinction is much more powerful, significant, and meaningful than the prevailing distinction between North and South, and developed and underdeveloped, and rich and poor, and so forth. So we have already established two such centers of activities, one in dryland zones with the Buckminster Institute for Desert Research of the Ben Gurion University in the Negev in Israel, and the other for the humid and dry tropics with Earth University in Costa Rica. With both, we've been operating on a number of levels for 12 years now. And very recently, we established a couple of new activities, which I'm very excited about. One with the Canary Islands, with the foundation of the University of Las Palmas, to deal with islands ecosystem.
Oh, wow.
And the newest is in Bhutan, with the Institute of Natural Resources of the Royal University of Bhutan, to deal with alpine, how elevation, sustainability issue of high elevation mountains. And I hope that in another decade, we'll be able to cover all the biomes of the biosphere this way, including dealing with issues of urban ecology, because you can look at urban centers, urban areas as ecosystems in their own right.
And so each of these centers would be sort of the home base for a number of initiatives addressing issues in that,
right.
In that area,
for example,
that are specific.
Like, for example, one of the initiatives, the flagship project of the lab, Project Wadi Atir in the Negev in Israel, has been connected with researchers from the university there.
Got it. Okay. Well, I hope we have time to talk a little bit about Wadi Atir towards the end of our time. But I did want to sort of segue to the approach of the lab, and which again, you know, with so many other efforts out there, large and small, you know, you felt a need to really cohere a different kind of approach to addressing these complex issues. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I think we have a slide.
So what we came to regard as the signature approach of the lab incorporates really three main components. One is that the whole idea of system thinking, a holistic view of issues, and a system-oriented design approach, trying to understand the totality of the issues that we're looking at by understanding what are the key variables and how those interact, mapping out those conditions, and really trying to look for leverage points that are the basis for strategies for producing change. The other component, these are all conceptual components, if you like. The other component is a kind of pioneering theory of change processes that we'll talk about a little later. But basically, it's an approach that makes a distinction between making change in a system where a system still stays the same, mm-hmm. and making the kind of transformation that makes a complete shift, mm-hmm. a whole new thing emerge. So it deals with the notion of emergent new quality, emergent new realities. And finally, is the definition of sustainability that we developed, and the 5 core principles. Now, this is very important because at the beginning, when we launched the lab, that question that you raised was really the question that I had on my mind. What will make it different?
Yeah.
And many other kind of thing. And I thought that those 3 components, and especially the definition, were extremely important.
So can you, that's a great segue. I really would like you to, take a minute to talk about the definition of sustainability that has been derived from your thinking and experience.
So I think many of you are familiar with the prevailing definition, but we took a slightly different approach here, which I'd like to get into the meaning. What does sustainability mean? So we can move to the acknowledge that mm-hmm. the term itself, the term sustainability, has been so overused and misused and abused, mm-hmm. that by now it's really lost its meaning. Mm-hmm. And it's used in many ways that are really incorrect when you think about it. For example, in some of the international development agencies, you would hear people talking about sustainable finance. And you say, oh my God, they're really financing sustainability. But when you look at it, you realize that what they mean is basically where the loans will be repaid. Mm-hmm. Therefore, there are sustainable loans, sustainable mm-hmm. finance. The same people talk about sustainable project and say, oh, wow, they're now doing projects about sustainability. And again, when you look at it, you realize that the question is whether a project that is being financed will have a life beyond the grant that it gets or the financing that it gets. And now, of course, it became completely, politically correct to use the term. So it's used everywhere by everybody. So you hear people talking about sustainable foreign policy. Is this or that foreign policy sustainable? People talk, I've even seen recently some ads by somebody about providing services for sustainable retirement planning. One example that I always like to use is from a yoga class that I've been to. The young lady who was doing the class, the instructor, was talking about sustainable asanas, encouraging people to maintain the asanas for a long period of time. So in all those cases, the term is used correctly grammatically.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with the challenges that are associated with the adverse impacts of humans on the planet itself. And this is where we need to focus. And even the prevailing definition is not very helpful. The prevailing definition came out of the UN, as most of you know, that basically says it's a puts a cross-generational emphasis by saying that sustainable development is development that takes care of current needs without jeopardizing the needs of future generations.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of faults with that definition, not the least of which is that it's very difficult, almost impossible, to compute economic utility values for future generations. If you are at all sensitive to any idea of democracy, future generations are not with us around the table to decide what's good for them.
Yeah.
So ethically, there is a problem there. But even more, it really doesn't define sustainability. It doesn't touch the topic. It just talks about a development process of some kind. So these are big flaws, I thought, and therefore we focus on trying to develop the lab own thing. And when we think about sustainability, I think the context, this is very important. The context is the whole planet. This is not just a superficial or naive ambition. We really have to think about that totality. The integrity and health of the biosphere. It's not just us, it's all other life forms, not just life forms, but the quality of the air, the quality of water, everything else. This is one organism here. And of course, the well-being of humanity.
So what's your definition?
So again, we had to come up with our own definition. And I want to talk about the approach there as well. So maybe we can look at the next slide that we have there. Basically, in approaching the definition, we tried to take a system view of the topic. What does sustainability means if you take your system thinking hat on? And when you talk system, you basically have to focus on two ingredients, if you like. One is what are the variables that makes that system? What are the components? And the second is how they actually interact.
Right.
The components and how they interact. So in the context of the idea, the concept of sustainability, there are two key variables: population and carrying capacity of an environment. Population and carrying capacity. This is really the context to the idea. And the reason that these are not being discussed broadly are that they represent in the international community, so to say, political international community, they represent untouchables. You can understand that because those who overindulge in consumption and pollution and so forth don't want to talk about the carrying capacity.
Right.
And those where the population are growing very fast are most sensitive to those ideas. And any attempt to talk about that component immediately receive kind of accusations of a new form of imperialism. The white people are trying to get all the others down and so forth. So the two most important components of the concept are off the table from the start. But nevertheless, they're very important. And I would add to say that these are about any population in any environment. It can be amoeba in a petri dish, or wildebeest in the savannah, like you see here, or humans on the planet. And the other thing to realize here is that the nature of that interaction between the two, the population and the carrying capacity, is very specific. It's a circular interaction. It's basically a loop interaction, not a linear one, where the two sides of the equations continuously affect one another. Carrying capacity basically creates the environment for particular kind of species to emerge, and populations, as they evolve and develop, continuously modify the environment itself. And in fact, the whole history, the long history of the biosphere, is a history of this kind of interaction. where, as you all know, I mean, eons ago, the composition of gases in the atmosphere would not make life possible as we know it today. But you had millions and millions and millions, billions years of evolving micro simple organisms that start modifying the chemical composition that allowed other to all the way to the mammals, and the kind of balance that exists today between those who use oxygen in breathing and those who discharge CO2, basically the plants and the animals and so forth. So that circular interaction is very important to look at. And if you look at it in a higher resolution level, which is our next slide, you see something like this. This is basically, you see here, you have the population and the carrying capacity on the two extreme. I would just add to say that population dynamics itself is quite a complex topic, not all of which is completely understood today. It in itself depends on a very complex system of interactions that has to do with fertility rates and birth rates and mortality and all of those kind of things. And when I say that these are not completely understood yet, there are many factors that impact population that we don't know. For example, there's many trends now that have been seen for a while around the world of a really disturbing, perhaps, drop in fertility in both males and females. And we don't know exactly why it is. Is it the species reacting? Is it the system adapting to the fact that there are too many? Or is it a result of all the noxious chemicals and stuff that we are putting in our bodies? We don't know that there. But the point is that the population impact the carrying capacity through its activity. The environment, of course, defines what population is possible in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing to understand here is that well, of course, the factors that are important here from the population side is the volume, the scope, and the level of intensity of activity, because the population impacts the environment through its activity. And the two have to be in some kind of equilibrium, if you like.
Yep.
The interesting thing is that all the myriad activities that represent the activities from the viewpoint that we are talking about really can collapse into two channels. One is the channels on demand of resources. We are basically consuming the environment, if you like.
Yeah.
And the other is the generation of byproducts that have to be absorbed by the, and the equilibrium, if you like, formula here is that you should not consume beyond the regenerative capacity of your environment. That has to be in balance, and that you should not generate byproducts beyond the ability of that environment to absorb.
Right. Right. So, and what's the role of technology?
And I'm sorry. Oh, technology has a very interesting role. Now, I'm talking about dynamic equilibrium. In other words, it's not the point that you reach once and for all and then say, okay, we got it, and we stay here. Because things are modified with time as condition change, population change, environment are modified. One of the interesting role of technology is it has a real way of modifying the environment. For example, by expanding it. You expand the carrying capacity by opening up new environment that were not within your reach before.
That's interesting.
By creating ocean-going boats a long time ago, or by now, if we go to Mars, suddenly there is a whole new thing added to the equations of what is the environment that is providing you with carrying capacity and so on.
Yeah.
So we can move to the definition.
Yeah.
Kind of
go ahead. Let's. I'd love for you to share, the articulation of the definition.
So this is the next slide.
Yeah.
And the definition is basically anchored in all these ideas that we talked about. That's the next slide is what you need, right? And it said that sustainability is a dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and the carrying capacity of the environment, such that the population developed to express its full potential. You don't put any limitations there. You don't know where we are going.
Right.
Other than one, without producing irreversible adverse effects on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. Now, the power of that definition is that it actually tries to focus on the question, what does sustainability means?
Right.
Beyond I just want sustainability and I don't know quite what it means. What does it really mean? The other, of course, the two other things here, which took quite some thinking, is one is, if you look at it, it mimics that circular structure.
Right.
Because it comes upon itself, so to speak. And finally, all the variables that are mentioned here, like population, carrying capacity, even some notion of well-being, are all measurable. They can be given values. So you can theoretically have a large screen in Madison Square Garden or 42nd Street there that shows you where we are at each moment on the planet in relation to compute all the time, where we are in relation to that, and give it value and see whether we're doing well or not.
Someone should.
And it's that equilibrium, of course. I'm sorry that I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's that equilibrium that is now out of balance, basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much further to say and ask you about just with regard to the definition, but I want to move on because there's a lot more that I'd love to have time for you to share. So the definition, coupled with these 5 core principles, are really the kind of anchors of the signature approach of the lab. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into great depth with regard to the principles, but I would like you to just unpack them, share them first of all, and unpack them a little bit. And I had an initial question about just the impetus to create a set of principles as opposed to a manifesto or a white paper, or, you know, what there must have been some reason for developing a set of principles. And can you talk about perhaps what the intrinsic power is of a set of principles as opposed to another way to communicate what you're trying to communicate?
Right. So let me just take one step backward and say, I mentioned the fact that the system is, so the whole system is out of equilibrium, if you like.
Right.
And what does it mean that it's out of equilibrium? We are consuming beyond regenerative capacity, witness deforestation, and witness the collapse of fisheries, and all the other things that are familiar. And we are overwhelming all the sinks on the planet with our waste byproducts.
Right.
So you have the plastics everywhere and the noxious emissions that leads to climate change that now everybody's focusing on that, but it's more serious than that. So this is why the current state is out of not sustainable. So
yeah.
And it's what we are doing here is really simply destroying and poisoning our own mother, so to speak, and the very source of life,
yeah,
upon which we depend. It's like sitting on a very tall tree on a branch and then sawing it off as you sit on it.
Yeah.
So we need to move to the principles themselves, and we have this next diagram that. When you think about that vector of population and carrying capacity, the activity vector, which represents so many different things, many of those factors that are compressed into that one line, many of those factors are basically physical aspects. They have to do with metabolic exchange, if you like,
right,
with energy and matter and so forth. But there are many others, non-physical factors that are included here. And they're very important, of course, because they have a tremendous impact on whether what we are doing is sustainable or not. And these have to do with various kind of cultural aspects, with all the institutional way that underlie our activities, the economic system, the societal organization, governance, and of course the spiritual level, if you like, the fundamentally what level of consciousness we represent in the world as individuals and collectively. Where are we in the consciousness, how should I say, the consciousness ladder? Are we totally materialistic in our view of the world, or are we more refined in how we see reality in ourselves and so on? So I found it convenient to collapse all the myriad factors there into 5 key domains that are represented here. And the first is the material domain. And the material domain really constitute the basis for regulating the flow of matter and energy that underlie existence. This is, of course, a realm that is not totally under our control, so to speak.
Right.
This is the reality that is given us. So again, regulating the flow of matter and energy that underlies existence. Then you've got the economic domain, a very important one as well, because that provides the guiding framework for defining, creating, and managing wealth. What is it that we consider wealth? How we define wealth? Is it dollars in the bank? Or is it a healthy environment, a happy population? All of those kind of things have to come into that equation. Then there is, of course, the domain of life, which provides the basis for appropriate behavior in relation to other species. We are part of a huge fabric of life with millions of other forms of life, and we are not very good neighbors in the way we are behaving towards all the rest. So the domain of life is important. The social domain itself, which provides the basis for social interactions. And finally, the spiritual domain, which identifies the necessary attitudinal value orientation and provide a basic for ethics, if you like. So just a small vignette here, very interesting. When I was working on developing this framework, I was still working with the World Bank, and I would share with colleagues what I was doing. And basically, I would hear, for a while, I thought I had those 4 first domains, and I thought I was done, but I felt that something was missing until I really realized that what was missing was the spiritual domain. And everyone that I talked to was saying, don't even touch that word. That word. If you want to be taken seriously by heads of states or heads of corporation, you cannot talk spirituality. And I didn't have enough confidence, I guess, in those days, and I would put it in or out depending on the audience, until I realized that this is a linchpin. This is the center of gravity. All the other domains deal with issues, with techniques, how you do things. And the last one, the 5th dimension, ask the question, why are you doing it in the first place? What is your purpose? Why are you here? What are you trying to achieve? So the other thing to say, and I'll try to do this quickly, from each of those, for each domain, there's derived a single principle. So there are 5 principles that correspond to the 5 domain, and each one of those principles comes along with its own kind of related policy and operational implication. So the result is a set of 5 core principles, which is systemic in nature. That's the important thing to realize here, because all of the 5 interdepend. All the aspects of those 5 domains continuously interact and define each other. So you cannot deal with one without the other. You cannot
self-reinforce
without having the right technology. If you focus only on technology, you probably end up doing the wrong things, which is what we're doing now, and so on. So what it means is that in sustainability-related initiatives, it's very important to incorporate all the five all the time. There are so many excellent projects around the world today that come under the sustainability umbrella, but if you look at them closely, they will be usually sector or issue specific. So there are projects about energy, or projects about water, or projects about women, or projects about community. We need to put all of those 5 dimensions together to get real results.
Right.
The piecemeal approach will simply not work. And the 5 principles are basically conceived as imperative statements rather than prohibitions that tell you what you need to do, not what you should not do. And each, as relate to each one of those 5 areas. So they basically prescribe the conditions. Each one of those principles prescribe one condition in that totality that must be fulfilled to ensure the viability of the whole. And that's the power of seeing all of this together. And again, I'm sorry that we won't have the time, but I wanted to give you a flavor. So if you look at one, for example, the one that relates to the material domain, the first principle. So we've got the material domain there. And this material domain, the physical world, not world, I won't call it, the physical reality, if you like, is really mediated by what we call the basic laws of physics. The special relativity that deals with the interchangeability of matter and energy. Right. The first law of thermodynamics that talks about the conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created or lost, only change shape. And lastly, the second law of thermodynamics that everybody should know, that talks about the direction of energy events towards increased entropy and diffusion. Now, why those are critical is because between them, these physical laws, scientific physical laws, basically, and we're talking about the physical phenomena here, not yet about consciousness and those kind of dimensions. So those are important because they prescribe the ultimate limits of the ultimate limit of possibilities in physical systems, and therefore they underlie the ultimate productive potential in use of resources. Now, the point is that our current industrial civilization, if you like, the current state of capitalism, is hugely destructive and highly entropic in its results. So the first principle, for example, to give you that example that I promised, the first principle says, contain entropy, and ensure that the flow of resources through and within the economy is as nearly non-declining as is permitted by natural law. You cannot eliminate, obviously, because of the second law, you cannot eliminate entropy, but you can manage it. You can be more wasteful or less wasteful. And this is up to us. So,
I mean, I hear that in some ways as a sort of design challenge. You know, can you talk about the role of design in the kind of approach of the lab, and then we've got to move on. I don't want to leave this without you addressing design.
If you remember that first image where we had the signature approach of the lab, it was said system-based design approach. So the notion of design is brought to the fore there, and it hints into one important thing that I think in the evolutionary trajectory of humanity, we got to a point here that we are really participating in the next step. We are participants, active participants, conscious participants in the next steps of our own evolution and the evolution of the planet. So we have some proactive role to play there. And that is the role of design. This is what design does. And actually what good design does everywhere is reduce entropy
Right.
Because it cuts, well, I won't go into that. But the other thing about design, which is so important, this is the concept that Fuller was pressing so much. You call it about design science and the design revolution and Forcer. Why is it important? Because our conventional approach to issues is to focus on problem solving.
Right.
Problem solving. So when you focus on a problem, you become entrapped by it.
Yeah.
And by the epistemology of that problem.
Yeah.
The design process acts completely differently because it asks you to project a vision and a goal, something that you want to achieve. If you design a plane, you say, I want to be able to fly at such a speed, at such a high altitude for such a, so you start by the specification of an ideal that you want to reach. And then you walk backwards to start figuring out what are the elements that are required in order to reach that. And many of those elements can be contrary to current way of doing things, for example.
Right. Thank you for that. And it's a good time to shift to, we're finally getting to the title of this, of this conversation, which is this notion of sustainability as a systems state. And, you just mentioned the idea of a design goal, a trajectory of carefully thought through steps to achieve something, but you're not defining sustainability as a goal. You're defining, like the UN does, you're defining it as a state. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, this is also, I think, a very, very powerful and important concept. At the first glance, it looks like the idea of sustainability as a goal is some wishful something that you want to achieve, some like a wishful attribute that are preferred by many. And a good example, of course, is the UN so-called Millennium Sustainable Development Goals. Now, when you look at that, it's so fascinating to see that the Millennial Sustainable Development Goal, there are about 17 of them or something, I can't remember. They're basically a list of nice things to have. It's a wish list that is prescribed without any reference to how those goals relate to each other. Mm. So it's not a system thinking, it's a linear list of things. This is one. There's no concept of what are the limitations under which those could or could not be achieved. Because what is happening there is so fascinating because it has to do with why change is so difficult. Basically, you've got the conventional, how shall I call it, the conventional framework of the current socioeconomic thinking that is now slapping onto itself those goals and say, let's achieve them. You see that paradox? It's right. And the paradox there is even worse because you can get the situation where you achieve in time, which will probably not happen anyway, but you will achieve in time each one of those goals by 2030, 2050, whichever. And the point is that if we do those things, if we achieve those goals, under the current way of doing things, we'll be in a much worse sustainability hole, if not a total disaster. Right. So this brings forth a different concept where we have to turn for a moment to cybernetics theory, if you like. And cybernetic is a theory that looks at how systems regulate themselves, how they self-organize, how they adapt and evolve, and basically asking the question, what kind of structures, what kind of mechanisms mediate their behavior? And when I say mechanism, lest anyone is offended, I don't mean machines. I don't mean mechanical things. So levels of consciousness, for example, will be a mechanism. Emotions psychology, all of those kind of things are mechanisms of their own right. And so that link between structure and behavior of a system is so critical. And this something that goes back to Norbert Wiener, who's recognized, used to be a professor of mathematics in MIT, a very interesting character. He was a child prodigy in mathematics. He earned his doctorate at 17.
Oh my gosh.
And so on. And so Norbert Wiener and his colleagues, in a very obscure paper of 1943 that probably few people read, that was called Behavior, Purpose, and Teleology, they established the connection between observable output of any system, observable output meaning the behavior of that system, and its internal structure. And what they were saying, basically, what the meaning of their discovery, so to speak, was that every behavior that you observe is produced by a particular structure. Underneath a behavior, there is a structure. Now, this looks obvious and simple, but think about how many times where we are trying to reform or change something, we are focusing on the behavior, not on the structure. And this is what and this, of course, the point is that notwithstanding your stated goals, regardless of what list of goals you're putting for yourself, if you don't reconfigure the structure, you will keep getting the same behavior, the same result.
Right.
So you can see where I'm kind of going with this, where I'm driving it. From this point of view, sustainability is a system state. And reflecting a state of a system, it is it is driven, if you like, or it is produced by an internal structure. And what are the factors that make that structure, that produce that state, is all the things that we mentioned before, things like the values, the view of the world, the dominant culture, the technology and the priority of use of technology, the structure of the economy and the way the financial markets work, the governance and all other all the institutions and so forth that we have, including, as I mentioned before, the individual and collective state of consciousness. Where are we as human beings? How much can we encompass in our concerns? So the problem that we face is that many of the current mechanisms that are in place, that are working, again, the governance, the economy, and so forth, are entirely antiquated. They are mechanisms that grew up in yesterday, thousands of years ago. They are Neanderthal. They're simply not meant, they were never designed for the kind of issues that we have to deal with on the planet today, which is integrating the whole of humanity, integrating that whole way of, that not way of life, but the whole living system into one healthy totality. And so what it means is that not only that a lot of them are not up to the challenge, if you like, but basically they are there blocking any possibility of emergence, of evolution, of taking the next step. And in that blocking, they basically produce all those issues that we erroneously call environmental problems, climate change, biodiversity, all of those kind of things are symptoms of the system being diseased, so to speak. It is blocked from expressing itself, and in that blockage, it expresses all those ill conditions. So when you take this is another thing that is very important to realize, and perhaps we can move to the next slide for a moment, that when you take a system view, again, of what I was talking about, that all those different factors, the culture, the this, the that, the other, what you see is you have you have a situation there where all the major components that we identify as components of the structure as a whole are basically interacting and mutually self-reinforcing. So the education system caters to the business needs who are driven by the economic structure, and all of those kind of things are self-reinforcing and mutually self-reinforcing, I say. And it's a configuration that, like any complex living system, is hugely, enormously resistant to change.
Right.
It's basically set its whole homeostasis and keeps going and keeps producing the people that thinks like they should be thinking in order to do what is demanded by the thing, and so on and so forth. And this is what is producing the unsustainable path, if you want, that we are on. And you can't change that outcome unless you are able to, as long as those stays the same.
Right. But do you see this?
What it means is that you have to change the outcome. And if you're serious about establishing the concept of sustainability as the organizing principle on the planet, you just can't tinker at the margins here. This is where, again, when the concept of design is coming in. Each component and the whole have to be redesigned, reconfigured to allow for the novel next step, if you like, in the engagement. And so change is of the essence. And what kind of change is an important question to ask.
Yeah. Well, do you see this as something that's sort of gradual and phased, or is there a kind of phase change moment that would bring about the kind of state that you're talking about, because it has to happen on all levels?
Well, I think the first is to understand a little bit more the idea of change, which is also, it sounds obvious, everybody knows what change is about. But yet when you begin to think about change, it's a very interesting, there are a lot of interesting conceptual relativities there that makes it a little more complex. And I think it's very important to understand change better, especially today, which is so on the vogue, so to speak, to claim oneself as a change agent.
Right.
And there's so many courses about how to be a leader of change, and how to become a change agent, and so forth. So the first thing that is important on a simple level is to be able to make a distinction between different types of change. Okay. And I think that the especially kind of poignant distinction was offered by Watzlawick and his colleagues, who are psychiatrists basically, and they made a distinction between two types of change, what they call a first order change, which is change that you can make within a system, while the system still stays the same. Right. You can refine it, you can move it around, you can do all kinds of things, but basically it's still the same system at the end of that. Or second order change, which is change that requires a discontinuity and a major shift in logic. The system is no longer the same, it evolved. This is where we're talking about emergent quality. It became something else. So the kind of comprehensive transformations that we are challenged with, everything that we talked until now, is obviously second order change issues. Right. And one of the problems that exists on all levels, I saw it a lot in years of management consulting, working with organizations, that it's very often that we tackle second order change issues with first order change strategies.
Okay.
Think about climate change, for example.
Yeah.
The issue of climate change is how to move from fossil fuels to renewables. And yet all the arguments for the last 50 years almost was about levels of emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is first order change where we need a massive transition, so to speak. And that simply will obviously not work. So ultimately, the choice is one, again, I mentioned earlier, is our collective hands. It's easy to say collective hands, but that's in itself a huge complexity because the planetary human collective now is totally fragmented and is all over the place. But nevertheless, that's a challenge there. And the big question is, will we be able to disconnect really from the noise? All the noise that we have to deal with 24 hours a day, in the news, in the this and that, and so forth, and clear our vision, purify our hearts, if you like, and kind of genuinely redesign, rewire, reconfigure, rethink, refill, feel like and feeling, and reconnect in bringing about the reality that will secure a better world. So with lab work, what we try and do is at least demonstrate kind of second order transitions in what we do. And I think that the next slide that we have, and I think the last one, demonstrates that very nicely. So I'll use that in order to characterize that idea of second order change. It works. And here you see that the duck swimming in that pool of water is basically swimming in a place that only 8 years ago looked like the picture on the right. And today it looks like the picture on the top. So this is a major transformation of a piece of ecology, if you like.
Interesting. And where was that picture? That was
sorry. This is the ecosystem restoration component of Project Wadi Atir in the Negev Desert in Israel, where we demonstrated we were able to demonstrate a very effective approach to combating desertification and really revitalizing a hugely degraded site.
Mm-hmm. And Wadi Atir, we have a film we can show briefly that, I think I probably speak for a lot of people who are hungry to see, well, what does this look like? Because on the one hand, the situation is so overwhelming, and this type of fundamental structural change also feels overwhelming. To make the transition in as peaceful and with the least amount of suffering possible for both humanity and other life forms. I think, so I'll put that out there as just a comment, maybe you could respond to, and then I think it would be useful for people to see this short film about Wadi Atir, to see what a kind of systems approach looks like, because we've been talking about quite abstract concepts, and then maybe we could open it up to questions if you think that's a good idea.
I would, before you go there, I would just like to make one comment about this overwhelming stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the challenges are enormous, and as we said, unprecedented, and everything else. But the trick how to approach overwhelming situations in general is not to be overwhelmed.
Right.
And it goes beyond that. I think that, funnily enough, that there certainly is a new spirit that you can detect, especially with younger people, more and more. I can see that there's a huge difference from 10 years ago. And more young people are completely and intuitively, on the gut level, committing themselves to making the world a better place. They don't want to become investment bankers.
Right.
They want to struggle with those issues. So in a way that the system is adapting. And this is perhaps why life is designed the way it is, with death and new birth, to tackle new possibilities afresh. There is an issue there of time, whether we'll be able to. I think a lot of people, a lot of really serious thinkers are talking about the window of opportunity here, that we are going to pass a number of thresholds beyond which will be very difficult to return. So how to organize to do all this in the next few decades or something is a very major question that we face.
And do you think that this moment of kind of global pause with COVID has provided some of the conditions, at least for a level of reflection that...
It certainly had such an impact. What it did, for sure, I think that horrendous year that we've all gone through has exposed very dramatically many of the pathologies in the current system, whether it's in governance or the way we interact or the way that countries relate to each other, everything else. So I would hope that it heightened the awareness that the business as usual, the normal, is really not something that we want to return to.
That's very clear. So let's watch this short clip about Wadi Atir and then come back, and we will take some of the questions. Please, if you haven't already put them in the chat, please do so, either directly to Alyssa or so everybody can see them.
Project Wadi Atir is the flagship development project of the Sustainability Laboratory. It is a groundbreaking initiative with a Bedouin community in the Negev Desert that demonstrates a model for sustainable dryland agriculture, showcasing Bedouin tradition and experience leveraged by advanced technologies. The project's radical innovations enabled it to overcome obstacles that were previously considered insurmountable. Project Wadi Atir encourages cooperation among diverse Bedouin tribes and provides an opportunity for Bedouin women to work alongside men, even holding key leadership positions. The project's herd of goats and sheep enables the production of high-quality dairy products. A seed bank and training program returns indigenous vegetables to household use, improving nutrition and health. The cultivation of medicinal desert plants showcases Bedouin healing traditions and enables the creation of health-related products. Following a waste-to-resources approach, the site is supported by an integrated infrastructure of green technologies, and its ecosystem restoration initiative has restored a barren site to productivity, combating desertification, enhancing biodiversity, and mitigating the effects of climate change. The project educates thousands of students annually and has attracted visitors from around the world. Project Wadi Atir is a model of hope and transformation, contributing to the improved well-being of the Bedouin community and demonstrating the Sustainability Laboratory's approach to development in a way that is replicable and scalable in arid zones throughout the world.
I just had a quick question about the project Wadi Atir and how it was developed within a partnership with Ben Gurion, and I think you have an interesting set of partners who are both funding partners as well as operational partners who are ensuring that it is successful. Can you just talk about that model also? That
the project has attracted a very interesting coalition, if you like, of almost representing almost all sectors of Israeli society. So we have a number of local NGOs that have been involved. Of course, the university I mentioned earlier, Ben-Gurion University, and their researchers from the Buckminster Institute of Desert Research. There's some local private sector companies, like Netafim, for example, that provided all the drip irrigation. And of course, government has been involved. We also have some very generous kind of key supporters. One is Joshua Arno that you mentioned before. I thought he was with us tonight. His family was a major contributor. The Jewish National Fund has been another major one, and the Israeli government, and then quite a number of individuals and family foundations and so forth. So it's been unusual in bringing all those components together, which is part of course, doing things like this.
Right.
To be able to create a reality that attracts others to join. And that is important because, for example, when we started that project, for most people, it was inconceivable that the government will support it. Right. And so on.
How far along in the project did the government come in?
How far?
How far along were you with the project?
Yeah, I think we are probably about a year away from kind of doing what we set up to do. But it's already now obtaining a life of its own, if you like. And there are many initiatives that are sprouting up that we'd never conceived of in the beginning, which are very nice. And they are actually initiatives that are generated by the community itself and by the leadership of the project. We mentioned earlier, I think, the idea on the movie talked something about women in leadership role that would have been inconceivable in this particular community. But 3 years ago, we put in place a young Bedouin woman, Lina Alatana, as a CEO of this project. That is a major undertaking by now, and she's doing a tremendous job. And again, against all odds, able to integrate what needs to be integrated and have all these men working with her without any hitch.
With that, I think I'm going to just formally close this part of the session and just thank you, Michael, for just sharing your work, your ideas, and being such a fount of kind of perennial wisdom and inspiration. I get so much out of it every time we have a conversation, and I have no doubt that the people here tonight did as well. I want to encourage you all to join us for the next session in May. I'm going to get the date wrong. I think it's the 26th, but you'll have a May 26th. Okay, there's a link right there in the chat for everybody to click on. And Michael will be in conversation with Jennifer Francis, a climate change scientist who has been brought to this conversation series by the lab's board member, Peter Dean. So that's going to be a really interesting follow-on to this discussion. So I hope you will all join us. Spread the word to your friends and colleagues to join us. We will be, we have recorded the session and they will be made available at some point in the future, and you will hear about it when they are. Thank you to Benjamin and Alyssa for holding down the fort so beautifully. And thanks everybody for being here.